Welcome to the National Workplace Bullying Coalition Workplace Bullying Coalition weekly webinar series. That was a little tongue twister. My name is Miss Kamei, and I'm the Vice President of the National Workplace Bullying Coalition. And I have the honor and the privilege of introducing to the webinar our President of the National Workplace Bullying Coalition, Jerry Carbo. Jerry Carbo is an attorney, and he is one of the founding members of the National Workplace Bullying Coalition. He is a full professor at the Grove College of Business at Shippensburg University. He has also practiced law for nearly a quarter of a century in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. He has a PhD and a master's degree in industrial and labor relations from Cornell, a JD from Penn State, and a BBA in accounting from Texas Christian University. Jerry has worked as an HR manager and employee relations manager for 2 Fortune 500 companies and has consulted with universities, labor unions, and employers in steps to prevent, detect, remedy, and eliminate workplace bullying. He served on the EEOC Select Task Force for the Study of Workplace Harassment from 2015 to 2018, and has published numerous articles and a book on workplace bullying. Jerry is a great friend of mine. He is a great friend to all of our members at NWBC. We are very, very grateful to have Jerry lead this organization. Welcome to the webinar, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. Appreciate everyone being here, and look forward to our discussion this evening and hearing any questions that you have as well.
Yes, great point, Jerry. Anybody that has any questions for Jerry, if you could please post those questions in the chat. At the end of the presentation, your questions will be read to Jerry. We won't name names of who's asking questions, so we want to make sure that we are respecting everyone's privacy. Feel free to post your questions throughout the presentation, but they won't be asked until the end of Jerry's webinar.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm still getting used to double screens for Zoom. So I'm going to make sure that it's the correct one once I do. So I'll have to turn to all of you to let me know if you're seeing hopefully a slide on one part of your screen, and then sort of the next slide is also up there on the right. Hopefully
Yes, we
that's
can
what you're
see
seeing.
that.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, so welcome. Most of you probably hopefully know me. Maybe you've seen at least parts of this before, but this is sort of the general workplace bullying training that I do. But we're going to call it sort of that light tonight, because what you'll see is there are 53 slides. I'm not covering the content of 53 slides, but I want to make those slides available to you. So if you want some additional information, or you want to, at some point get into the more detailed training, that would be great. So before we get started, I thought it would make sense to talk a little bit about the National Workplace Bullying Coalition. For those of you who might not be aware of our vision, I thought it would make sense to share that with you. But our vision is really to use education, mobilization, research, and any other tactics to prevent, detect, remedy, and eliminate workplace bullying, and also really to focus on assuring a workplace or workplaces that assure dignity at work. And that's really our focus, has always been that, making sure that people have dignity at work. You can find out more about us at our website, workplacebullyingcoalition.org. And also, if you feel like making a donation, we are an all-volunteer organization. But of course, even with that, there are always a lot of expenses to keeping organizations running. So we always appreciate your donation, big, small, whatever you can afford, whatever you feel like makes sense. Today, I want to talk about understanding harassment and bullying in the workplace. And, after last week's seminar, definitely Dorothy is a really tough act to follow. So hopefully I'll live up to some of those expectations. And some of this I hope you'll see some overlap because Dorothy's work's incredible. And I do think that there's some overlap between our work. But I come at workplace bullying from a slightly different perspective. As Kamei mentioned, I'm an attorney, been practicing law for a long time now. And so a lot of what I do is a legal analysis. But the other piece of this is my PhD work was really focused on corporate social responsibility and in particular workers' rights as human rights. So my perspective on workplace bullying is really a legal perspective, both nationally and internationally, as well as a human rights perspective. And much of my early work on workplace bullying was to define the phenomena because we have all kinds of different definitions out there and really wanted to work on what I could find as an effective definition, and a definition that would allow us to really assure dignity in the workplace. And I did that through legal analysis as well as qualitative research of targets' experiences, written narratives, interviews, focus groups. So I'm going to talk about that definition. I'm going to talk about identifying workplace bullying a bit, the effects of workplace bullying, just going to cover those quickly because you'll see a lot of overlap there, understanding why it occurs, and then also understanding a little bit of what can be done about workplace bullying. So for me, my background's in employment law. And so one of my first things was to say, what is similar to workplace bullying? Where can we get a starting point? And a lot of my prior work to engaging in this research was working in workplace harassment or looking to eliminate harassment from workplaces. And so I think it gives us a really good starting point. And when we look at the EEO laws and we look at the CFRs and the definitions, we see that in the US, we define harassment as unwelcome, offensive conduct that is based on or impacts an individual based upon their protected status and that is severe or pervasive enough to create a working environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive, or that unreasonably interferes with the target's working environment. And those protected statuses include race, color, national origin, gender, religion, age status over 40, disability, sexual orientation, sexual identity, and in some states it goes beyond that. Familial status, political status is included as well in certain states. And the early research on workplace bullying really was sort of focused on, well, really what we're just talking about is that harassment, but take away the protected statuses. And one of the reasons we see that is, of course, some of the best researchers in the area, Namey, really early on found that 75% of acts of harassment in the workplace aren't based upon a protected status, or it's really hard to prove that they are. And there's a critical difference there. So I really like the idea of it's really hard to prove that they are, because sometimes they are, but it's sort of underlying or hidden. So it gives us a starting point, but it also gives us a point to say, where are the gaps in what we have right now? Where are the gaps in workplace harassment? Immediately, we see this one gap that says protected statuses, right? So only 25% can we show it's based upon a protected status. So let's eliminate that one. But there are other gaps too. The severe and pervasive standard becomes problematic at times. The reasonable person standard can be problematic at times, but there are also lessons from the workplace harassment jurisprudence. And one of those big important lessons that I found that's different in the bullying research versus the harassment jurisprudence, as well as most international harassment laws, is that for some reason or another, when we get into the research, we want to add this intent qualifier saying, well, the bully has to have this intent. And the reality is that even if a bully has intent, what we know from a legal standpoint, it's almost impossible to ever prove intent. And so for this definition, what I've done is I've eliminated intent from the requirement because we see the problems that it causes. The second thing is, interestingly, we also see bullying oftentimes say it has to be repetitive. And there are two problems with that. when we talk about it from a legal standpoint, that repetitive also oftentimes becomes it has to be the same behavior over and over. And bullies don't always engage in the same behavior. We're going to see there are all kinds of different behaviors that they engage in. But the second thing is what we actually find in a lot of the jurisprudence, and we see this particularly in the Quebec law on moral or psychological harassment, that oftentimes it's single events that can or that are more damaging and that are easier to prove to be bullying. And so I also found a lot of problems with the idea of this repetitive nature. And so when I look at harassment, what I see it as is it's a form of workplace bullying, but it's just one subcategory of workplace bullying. And then as I went through the research, looked at national laws, international laws, talked to targets, heard about their experiences, found themes in their experiences, a few things stood out. First, I already talked about intent and repetitive nature, but the other thing that stood out is that there needs to be a power differential in order for something to be workplace bullying. There's a source of power. It doesn't have to be formal, but there has to be some power over that the bully has over the target. And the unwanted and objectionable pieces of the harassment standard also made a great deal of sense. So after all the research, the narratives, and then testing this in the focus group, the definition I came up with was that workplace bullying is the unwanted abuse of any source of power that has the effect of or intent to control, to intimidate, control, or otherwise strip a target of his right to esteem, growth, dignity, voice, or other human right in the workplace. And adding to that over the years, we also said, well, look, we have these other definitions that are similar but have some differences. And so we added to this as part of the coalition's work things like moral, psychological, general harassment, incivility, which our past president, Catherine Mattice, does a lot of work on that, abusive supervision, violence, mobbing, aggressions, and so on, all can be a form of workplace bullying. And this gives you an idea of that if we're just to say, let's just do general harassment, here's what the definition would look like. You can see it's just taking out those protected classes, and you see there's a lot of overlap between these two definitions. Now, I mentioned earlier, one of the things you're going to see is there all kinds of different tactics. And this is where that repetitive becomes problematic. But just a few from my findings, ranging all the way from schoolyard type of bullying to, what really is becoming more and more common today. And that's what I call either organizational or task bullying. And that's using company policies to bully and to intimidate, the use of, for instance, performance improvement plans, but also other things like room assignments in K-12, office assignments in higher ed, class assignments in higher ed, leave policies and whether or not leave is granted. These organizational tactics that we see as well are forms of bullying. And then we also have this in the research, this methodology that is known as the operational methodology of determining whether or not bullying has occurred. And the operational method uses, in essence, surveys. And what we see in the surveys is the most prevalent of these is the negative acts questionnaire. And what you can see in this is there's numerous, and I'm just going to flip through these slides, numerous types of behaviors that have been found to be workplace bullying through decades of work now on the negative acts questionnaire. And what you'll see in these slides, if you go back and you want to take a look at them, and we'll make them available for you, is that what I've done is I've bolded those things that are task behaviors and task related or organizational forms of bullying. And the reason I do that is because, again, today what we see is that these are becoming the most common, most prevalent types of workplace bullying. And so we really have to have a focus on these when we think about workplace bullying. And so when we break it down a little bit further, what we can think of is that, okay, we have this one subset, unlawful harassment. We have these two different types of bullying, task and relationship, or interpersonal and organizational. And both of those types of bullying can take the form of unlawful harassment or fall outside of unlawful harassment because they're not necessarily based upon, or we're not able to prove that they're based upon a protected status. So gives you an idea of how I look at defining workplace bullying. Next question I sort of asked is, well, who does the bullying? And in the United States, most of the literature points to most prevalent coming from supervisors. But we also see that even though that's the most common, it also comes from peers, it comes from subordinates. Interestingly enough, what we see is in some more egalitarian societies or lower power distance societies, that oftentimes that bullying can be more common at lower levels than what it is, or not. Still, supervisors tend to be the most prevalent, but we still see sometimes higher rates in more egalitarian societies from peers and even subordinates. And in my own research, all levels. I saw all levels, and in terms of targets, saw all kinds of different targets as well. So, what does bullying do? As Dr. Susskind talked about last week, we know that bullying has incredible negative impacts. And it impacts so many different groups. For targets of workplace bullying, back 25 years ago, Einerson, had found that this is probably a more crippling, devastating problem for workers than all other types of work stress put together. So really serious type of outcomes, really negative, strong negative outcomes. Fahey and Devine, I think, did a great job of sort of categorizing these in the psychological, economic, physical, and social outcomes. And in their findings, we see things like stress, suicide ideation, and then things a little bit less, impactful than that, hypervigilism and loss of esteem. These two are interesting though, because one of the things that we oftentimes see is when targets report bullying, the hypervigilism and even the loss of esteem are oftentimes mistaken for them being to blame, right? Like you're being overly sensitive, but that oftentimes comes about because of the bullying experience. So it's important for organizations, it's important for people who are going to take steps to address workplace bullying to understand that hypervigilism exists and occurs. Um, so we see effects on targets, talked about those, PTSD, suicide ideation, some of the worst. But oftentimes what's overlooked are the other effects on families, bullying at home, broken relationships, loss of spousal and parental consortium. We see bystanders that oftentimes have the same types of effects to them that we see for the targets. We see lost confidence, lost commitment to the employer, unwillingness to report, anxiety, fear, nervousness. Clients and customers, one of the things, one of the areas I've studied pretty extensively is in K-12 over the past 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, due to being sort of brought into the K-12 area by the Badass Teachers Association because they saw bullying that led to teacher suicides. And one of the things that I've learned from that group is this concept that they have that a teacher's working conditions are a child's learning conditions. And the reality is all of employment works that way. The working conditions are also the customer's conditions, are also the client's conditions, are the student's conditions, and so on. We also see effects on communities that are oftentimes overlooked. This leads to increased unemployment. It leads to foreclosures. It leads to evictions. It leads to withdrawal by targets and bystanders and families. So we have less community involvement, increased poverty, increased homelessness. And then the impact on organizations. We would hope that these would be enough to get organizations to take it seriously. It's not, unfortunately. But what we see is it's $1 billion problem, billions of dollars of problem every year in the United States that are lost. Some estimates of each incident costing up to $1 million or more to organizations, leads to absenteeism, turnover, increased scrap, lawsuits, workplace violence, decreased OCBs, all kinds of problems for organizations. And then what I looked at is why does this occur? And for me, I see three precipitating factors. And one is, as our board member Wilma pointed out last time, is acceptance societally. We have to have a culture that allows for this. Organizations then have to allow it. And then still, a bully has to be willing to engage in the behavior. When we have all three of those, we sort of have this recipe for disaster that leads to the bullying events. Thought it was really interesting. In my research, I don't really separate out the bullying from the thinking about and planning to engage in bullying, but I thought that was a great observation, a great finding last week from Dorothy. And I think this flowchart actually needs to have something to in effect adding that or recognizing that. One of the things that I found really interesting, though, is after the bullying occurs, what happens? And what I found is sort of across the board, targets have the effects before they have awareness, or what I would call consciousness because of my labor background, of the bullying occurring. So they have things like withdrawal, absenteeism, lower esteem, and so on. And then they have some level of consciousness that says to them, hey, I've been targeted for bullying or harassment. And that level of consciousness differs. It's either individual consciousness, where they recognize this is happening to me, or sometimes class consciousness. And class consciousness, where they recognize there's a whole group of us suffering, and maybe collective action is a path to solve that. What differs, or what differentiates which type of consciousness occurs, is really sort of the setting. When the target's alone and nobody's there to talk with them, they get the individual consciousness. But what I found is when I brought targets together into focus groups, all of a sudden we saw that class consciousness occur. In that class consciousness, why, or that type of consciousness, is important because it determines what steps targets will generally take to react to the workplace bullying. So real quickly, I just want to go through this last part, the solutions. And again, this is sort of the training light on this, but the best way to sum up the solutions to me is one of my committees on my or one of the members of my committee for my dissertation, Lance Compa, wrote a great paper way back in the late 90s. And what he said is, for all employment protections, what we know is we have to have three things. We have to have really strong laws with strong enforcement. We have to have a really strong labor movement that's focused on the day-to-day issues of workers. And then we also need employers who do the right thing. For me, for workplace bullying, I had one more thing there. We need upstanders. We need bystanders that become upstanders. The reality is that for targets of workplace bullying, the solutions aren't very great. Almost always the solutions end up with, or not almost always, but a high percentage, they end up with an exit from the organization. In our own sort of research, in our book, what we found is even those targets who defined their bullying situation as a success, it almost meant that they had left the organization in almost all circumstances. Other problems for targets is when they're dealing with it with themselves. What some of the findings suggest is direct active coping doesn't work the way it does for other stressors. And direct active coping may actually exacerbate the bullying. And when direct active coping doesn't work, it can lead to other really bad things like alcohol and drug use and abuse. So we need to go beyond expecting targets to take care of this. So the next level is bystanders stepping in. And I think it's great if you see it going on, stand up for the target. Don't get involved in the bullying and the mobbing. Stand up, become an upstander, intervene, deflect, pull the targets away from the situation. Supporters. Support is found to ameliorate the effects, at least. So we really need families and advocates and counselors paying attention. The other thing that we need is we need attorneys who are willing to be creative with this. Nothing frustrates me more than seeing someone who's been harassed at work and they go into the attorney and the attorney says, well, I need a smoking gun. You don't need a smoking gun. It's your job as an attorney to find the smoking gun. So stop using that excuse and start being aggressive. That's my message to attorneys. It's also, when I was on the EEOC task force, it's the commissioner's message to attorneys. They want to see attorneys bring cases that are novel. They want to see them bring cases and make the case as to why this is harassment, and for us, why it's bullying. Organizations despite the huge amount of evidence, it'd be great if they would solve it. It'd be great for them. It would save them millions of dollars, maybe even billions of dollars, depending on the size of the organization. What we find is they don't. A lot of the research says HR is really, really bad to go to in these cases, that oftentimes they inflict more damage on the targets and they're not likely to solve it. Organizations that report having anti-bullying policies, the findings are they don't. What they have is anti-harassment policies, and they have those because in essence the law requires them, but very few cross over into bullying. And you'll see here the research that just says HR not a good solution, so we need to get to where they can be, and it's easy for them to do so. Strong policies, better organizational culture can both solve this at the organizational level. Unions also need to play a role. Stronger collective bargaining language, bylaws, handling these issues of bullying. Even if you don't have the CBA language, you can always take on the case and try to protect the targets. And then the most important thing is back to that strong law with strong enforcement. We are way behind in the United States. Almost every other industrialized country has addressed this in some form or another, whether it is statutory or whether it is through their common law or whether it is through, an active labor movement that focuses on this problem. But we need to get there. The only really strong law with teeth in the United States is the Puerto Rico legislation, and we need to model that. So that's what I have for you today. I always have trouble unsharing, finding where it's the unshare. But let me see if I end slideshow. That seems to have worked. And I think the share is off. Is the share off, Kamei?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, it is.
So that's what I have for you today. Lots more information on the slides that I'm going to make available to you. We'll have a PDF of those. And, in the future, the plan will be to, offer sort of this training, the complete training webinar, and hopefully you'll come back and attend that as well. But I wanted to give sort of the coverage of workplace bullying light version tonight.
I actually have a question for you, Jerry.
Cool.
As you know, my husband recently became the union steward for his employer and helped facilitate his union organization and his negotiations, or his involvement in the negotiations of their CBA. He extends his thanks and gratitude to NWBC and his wife for helping him with that, by the way.
Awesome.
So, what would you say to, an employee, or a target essentially, that is within an organization, that is unionized, that does have a union, that does have a CBA, what would you say to one of them in regards to facilitating or introducing this conversation about workplace bullying with their union when that conversation hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So a couple of things I would say is one, the conversation, the sort of laying the groundwork for this should be pretty simple, because the reality is workplace bullying, back to that 1999 statement from Einerson, this is the worst thing that can happen to you in the workplace. And that's what unions are all about. It's about making our work lives better. So it should be an easy approach. The second thing, though, I would say is that there tends to be always this concern from union leadership of what happens when it's two members bullying each other. And the reality is this. In the UE, the United Electrical Workers, they do a great job of this. Their position is, look, if our members are bullying each other, that's a threat to our solidarity. A threat to our solidarity is our threat to our power. If we have no power, we get bad contracts. We can't, win grievances. We can't protect employees. So the second thing is to say, look, even if you're worried about union or member to member bullying, you want to eliminate it, because that bullying will drive out that solidarity, will eliminate our power, And on the other side, if you don't address it, there's a chance the employer is going to address it. And then we're going to be out of luck. And the employer is not going to address it for the most part, in a way that protects the targets. They're going to address it in the way that benefits the organization. So
Mhm.
oftentimes they might take the side of the bully because they view the bully as a more important member of their organization, or the key really for HR, they view them as a less likely person to sue the organization than the target. And so unions need to take control of this. And that's how they can create even more power in the workplace. And it's a great organizing tool too. So if they want to extend, they want to organize additional workplaces, they want to extend their local to other places, this is a great way to get workers on board.
Thank you. Thank you. We do have a question in the chat. The question is, and you are the most appropriate person to answer this question.
Okay.
How far along is the initiative to enact legislation against workplace bullying?
Yeah. So to me, it's very much still in its infancy, which is extremely frustrating because the reality is it's now in its 30th year, and we have to figure out what we need to do. And actually, because of that, I asked my son to do a little work for NWBC as an intern to really
Yeah.
look into what have we seen in terms of how has other employment legislation been passed.
Mhm.
And I think we need to really take a step back and sort of follow those models. There's a lot of push right now for things like, well, we need bipartisanship. The reality is there aren't any employment laws that are really passed based upon bipartisanship. You can make the argument that the Civil Rights Act was, but the reality is this: the Civil Rights Act was bipartisan in name only. The people who voted yes for the Civil Rights Act in 1964 all became Democrats. They might have been Republicans in name, but the parties were shifting at that point in time. The Democrats who voted no were referred to as Dixiecrats, and all of them except one, at least in the Senate, Senator Byrd, eventually became Republicans. And so when we take a look back, what we see, it was passed along party lines. And so one of the things we have to know is that's reality. But the problem with that is the Workers' Party has abandoned labor, and the Workers' Party, no longer puts forward aggressive legislation. So we
Mhm.
need to figure that out. We need to figure out how do we get to this. And we need to also, I think, make sure that legislators that take this forward have skin in the game, because we have had the legislation proposed a couple of times. And initially we thought, oh, this sounds great. In Rhode Island, for instance, the Senate passed it unanimously, but
Mhm.
they made not a single amendment. And to me, that sort of signified they're not really committed to this. If they make the amendments, then they have commitment. And to me, Rhode Island even, had the expectation that the House was never going to pass it, and they didn't. And we had a great hearing in Massachusetts as well, but nothing came of that. So I think we're at ground one. And to me, part of what has to happen also is we need to study these other laws and to express how they work, and all the fears that people might have just don't come true. And so now we do have the Puerto Rico legislation passed in 2021. I think studying that might be the next step to getting legislation passed.
Yeah, was our intern project this summer. For those of you who are in attendance, Jerry's son, part of his college curriculum was this intern program, and he conducted research in other countries where workplace bullying legislation has successfully passed. And the reason why this was a big project for us is because we wanted to study what action was taken, what steps were taken, in these other countries that helped workplace bullying legislation get passed. And so we wanted to, gather all of that research and then bring that back here to the States and implement here with our team, and taking those same steps in attempting to pass the Dignity at Work Act, which is proposed legislation that the amazing Jerry Carbo has written for us, which
Collectively.
yes, collectively,
Yeah.
which many of our volunteers and our bill state directors have actually taken to their local and their state legislators and lobbied essentially the Dignity at Work Act in hopes of obtaining sponsors
Yeah.
to take the bill up the ladder. And so we're very passionate about that internship program and will continue that education. Great question. Can you talk a little bit, Jerry, to the group about that? The Dignity at Work Act, the proposed legislation that we have.
Yeah.
We've got a fabulous young lady in Oregon, Misty Orlando, who has just made great strides with
Yeah.
legislation there. So can you talk to our attendees a little bit about what that looks like for somebody who is interested in potentially pursuing legislation where they live?
Yeah, definitely. So, and we, Dignity at Work Act, we tend to refer to as DAWA simply because the acronym, and that sort of stuck over the years. And we, to start off with, we have a legislative advocacy team. Director of that team, Lee Schmidt, is here on the call with us tonight. So please join up if you want to see legislation get passed. The Dignity at Work Act, it does a number of things. One, it assures that all forms of workplace bullying are included. So it's got that expansive definition that I talked about earlier today. Two, it assures access. One of the big problems for employment legislation is our system is largely inaccessible for employees. Some states, it's really common to have attorneys who take cases on contingency in employment, but in the majority of states, it's a rarity. And so, even on contingency, the median worker and below in the United States is not going to find an attorney to take their case on contingency because the damages aren't enough.
Right.
So what we really have is a system that is accessible to upper middle class employees who tend to be the least likely to suffer employment harm. So we need to fix that, and DAWA does that. DAWA says we're going to have a system where there's no cost. There is a commission that will hear these claims, like what we see in Quebec with the Canadian law. So it assures that access. Third thing it does is it gives employers what I call an incentive to make sure that they are addressing workplace bullying. Some people get upset when I use that word, but we use that word in the legal realm to really mean the incentive is you don't want this big stick smacking you. Okay, that's the incentive. So there are big penalties for employers who don't take steps to eliminate workplace bullying, which means there's a big incentive to do so on top of the billions of dollars of revenue that you're losing, right? Here's the legal incentive to do so as well. So the bill does that. The other thing that I would stress, though, is anytime you're taking a bill forward, a couple of things. One, I don't view us as owning the bill. So when you take this bill forward, take it forward. It becomes your bill. You're the leading your state. That's the way it should be. If you want to tweak it, I do ask that you ask us about those tweaks so we can discuss those. But if it fits to your state, it's what you should do. But one of the things that you should understand is once you get sponsors, it's no longer yours either. It belongs to the legislators. And what I really want to see is I want to see them put some skin in the game and make amendments to it. So don't be offended if your sponsor says, this is good, but I'd like to take out point Z and add point X here. That's a great sign. That means they're fully committed and they're not just BSing you to get you in and out of their office as quick as possible. So that's the type of thing that we're looking for. And and it means finding the right sponsors, finding people who are able to take bills forward, finding people who truly believe in it as well. And the reality is about 1/3 of workers in the United States have been targets of workplace bullying. There's no reason to think that our legislators are any different. So you can sort of say there's a good chance that 1 out of 3 of our legislators in your state, they've been targets and they would be great advocates. So we hope that they would take DAWA forward. We have that model legislation available to anybody who wants to use it and take it forward. But we also have this legislative advocacy team. I hope you'll join that team.
Yes, anybody who's interested in joining that team, you can find that information on our website, the National Workplace Bullying Coalition.org. And all of our meetings with all of our board members are actually listed on our website, and the leader of that group, their email is listed there. So you can contact them directly to join any of those teams. We do have another question in the chat. The question is, what are your thoughts on why we see such high bullying rates in teaching and in nursing industries?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and there I think are a few factors that lead to it. One is we just tend to see this in care work more than where we see elsewhere, and I think part of that is the type of people who enter care work. Right, we're really devoted. You hear all the time that nurses need to put patients first. You hear that from teachers as well, right? You got to put the students first. It's all about the students. None of it's about you. And so we create this atmosphere where employees, teachers, nurses are sort of, secondary or even tertiary to organizational concerns. The other thing is we have a growing power distance in K-12, and we've always had this perceived power distance in healthcare, right? So a lot of the bullying in healthcare is by doctors, and a lot of that is because of this perceived power differential, and maybe even this idea of the level of respect that they should have compared to nurses who actually do, no offense to doctors, but it's really the nurses who do the majority of the work in hospitals and patient care, and they're the ones who have that direct connection. They should be treated much better. But we also see this now in higher ed and in K-12 with what has become the administrative class. It's so odd to me that we forget, like, the term principal, and this is also something that Wilma DeSoto pointed out to me. The initial meaning was principal teacher, right? Because they were the primary teacher in an organization. They were the top teacher. And so it was teachers leading teachers, right? And so you didn't have that problem. But now we no longer have that. The majority of administrators spend maybe a year or two in the classroom, and then they get their, EDD in whatever it is, higher ed leadership in higher ed, curriculum or school leadership in K-12, and they move into that power position, and we see this separation. We also see the stress in those places, and stress leads to bullying. So K-12 is super stressful. People don't understand that. Just talk to a few teachers for a while, get to know them, listen to their work experiences, and you'll sit back and be like, wow, I can't believe that this is what you have to do every day. Not sure how you do it. And we see that with nurses as well. Super high stress environments, and that tends to be one of the precipitating factors as well. So I think we have a really big conglomeration of pieces there. High power differential, growing power differential, high stress, and this commitment to caring work that allows targets to be vulnerable.
We see that power imbalance in the legal field as well.
Yes, yes, we do.
Yes, with lawyers and support staff, very, very prevalent in the legal field. Can you talk to us, Jerry, about NWBC's certification program and our business outreach, to businesses and the purpose and our mission regarding that certification program that we developed?
Yeah, definitely. So this is something I am really excited about, because again, it goes back to that compass three-legged stool, which for us becomes the four-legged stool. But the third leg of it is, no matter what happens with laws, we can't enforce them. Even with strong enforcement, we can't enforce them every place, everywhere. And so what we really need is, we need employers doing the right thing, as many as possible. And that's really what we want to do through this certification. We want to help employers do the right thing, that will be right for their employees, but will also be right for the organization. And so what we have is, we have this program where employers can, in essence, the first year, by just sort of taking the first steps to say, yeah, we want to address workplace bullying. Here's how we want you to help us. We want you to, you know, help us to implement policies if we have any gaps, help us to conduct training if we have it. And we don't even have to be the ones that conduct it, but we need to make sure that it's ongoing. They get this initial certification, and it's fairly straightforward. It really just means that you've made a commitment to end bullying in your workplace. And then what we hope to do is, over the years, to then make sure that that commitment's not just on paper. And so to continue the certification, there's sort of a higher standard each year. So, year 2 or 3, we'd want to go back and survey the employees and see, is your bullying rate lower than the industry? That's what we would expect to see. Do your employees know of the policy? Is the policy working? Are reports being taken seriously, and so on? But the idea is really just to get to that third leg of employers doing the right thing. And here's the thing: on the front end, for every employer that comes through, we also have a costing program. We can show you the estimated cost of what bullying's costing them right now. And the benefit of implementing this will far outweigh the costs of implementation, and will bring those costs of bullying way down. And it's not only a benefit to the workers and the organization, it's a benefit to their communities, it's a benefit to our society, it's a benefit to families, it's a benefit to bystanders. So, I really hope that we can get organizations involved in getting that certification.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. You are always, full of answers and full of, empowering the team and leading us. Such a great webinar presentation from you. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, if they want to follow you, if they, are looking for an attorney potentially that could help them with their workplace bullying experience, how can people contact you? Where can they follow you at? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, so definitely follow me on LinkedIn. Definitely follow NWBC on LinkedIn. So that's always a good way to be in touch with me. Feel free to follow me on Facebook if you want. I tend to be, my most radical on Facebook, I will tell you that. I am in the business college at Shippensburg University, the token Marxist in the business school. So understand that that's the direction I come from. But yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to me that way. And also you can email me at drjcarbo@comcast.net. And I will, if I can get the chat, I'll just type that in there real quick.
Perfect.
And yeah, so feel free. Any of those ways works. Email, I check it pretty constantly. So I tend to get back to any email that I see within 48 hours. So, but I do get a lot of emails. So if it's been 48 hours and you haven't been in touch with me, or I haven't been back in touch with you, as I tell my students, just send me a kind reminder. Not you don't have to put me on, blast or anything because it's been 48 hours, but just let me know, hey, not sure if you missed this email, because if you haven't heard back from me in that time, I probably did miss the email.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jerry. As always, it's a pleasure to hear from you. You always bring a wealth of knowledge and information to the topic. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. The National Workplace Bullying Coalition thanks you. Myself, Jerry, the president, and our lovely executive Director, Board Member Dorothy Suskind is attending as well. So on behalf of all of the board members in attendance tonight, thank you guys so much for attending. Week 3, I will be presenting my webinar next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be sending out emails to all of our attendees for next week's webinar. And then the last week of the month, one of our amazing board members, Wilma DeSoto, will be presenting her webinar as well. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Wilma. So thank you guys so much for attending. If you need to get in touch with us, please visit our website and fill out the contact form, and we will get back to you. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you, Kamei.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care, everyone.